front-facing camera. It's a Stan Lee camera, because Stan Lee would say face front, true believers. In the Stan Soapbox columns in Marvel Comics. Are we rolling? Good. Hip, 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 hip. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. Stee-dee-da-dee-da-da-do. Razzmatazz as it's so. Picks of the week. Well, after a light week last week, this week has been bananas, but basically just pulled the top 3 off the stack. And we will begin thusly. Here I have in my left hand a copy of Alien Volume 2, Number 1, as published by the Marvel Comics Group. The exact same... Oh no, it's a different artist. It was Salvador La Roca, but now it is Julius Ota, who I'm not familiar with. Still Philip Kennedy Johnson writing it, though. And they did 2 arcs, and they're like, alright, that's good enough. Let's start the series over again. Why not? 2 Alien number 1s in 1 year's time. It makes as much sense as anything. But I am excited for this, and this cover is really nice. All the covers on this book have been super nice so far, which does fit with the when all the Alien comics were published by Dark Horse. That was always the case too. They were often painted covers, if I recall. Alien Genocide, which was my first Alien series. That might have been painted interiors too. Now I'm thinking about it. It matters little. Also this week, All Out Avengers number 1. This is a new Avengers monthly because, again, why not? I have a feeling that this will be like a lot of titles these days where you go like, oh, it's going to be a monthly, and it might be for 6 months to a year, and it'll get restarted because it's this big number 1. Everybody loves a number 1. I mean, you know, I have a lot of criticisms about popular culture, and especially as it pertains to comics, and almost all of them can be traced back to me wishing comics were more popular. It's not as though I wished it into existence, but, and I think I might have said as much before, but when I was a kid, like junior high, early high school, I always felt like a big loser because I was just a big comic book nerd and I didn't have that many friends. You know, the sorts of things you worry about as a teenager. And it was always a bummer that I just didn't have anybody to talk comics with. And so, and I would become friends. Through high school, I would become friends with all manner of shithead just because he might have read comics. Not all of them, God knows. Some of my best friends from high school, or some of my best friends in high school, we did have that interest in common. But anytime I met a guy that had comics, I was like, oh, let's be friends. And then I'd be friends with them and I'd go like, oh, you're a dickhead. And then that's kind of what's happened on a much larger scale. Now that nerd culture has become mainstream culture, sorry about that. Like, now that it's that way, it's just, sorry. I didn't know how good I had it. And I'm not going to talk about that number 1 phenomenon again, just because I already have, but yeah, it continues to bug me. I was, today at work, I was pricing a bunch of comics, and there's a character in the Marvel universe named Silk, who is like a kind of a supporting member of the Spider-Man family. So she's spun out of that series. But I haven't really read much Spider-Man. I'm not familiar with Silk at all. And so when they gave her own book, I didn't bother. And I realized today, as I was pricing these books, that there had been 4 different Silk series in the last 7 years. That's insane. Because like the first one was only like 5 issues, the next one was only like 7. It's like, just make them into miniseries. Quit doing this number 1 thing over and over again. It's just super, like, the last 2 series, and this is something else that they do a lot now. Alright, I'll go on this bird walk, I guess. So, with all the comics that started back in the 60s, which is most of them, Spider-Man, Avengers, X-Men, Daredevil, they always renumber. They constantly start those books over too. But a few years ago they started putting beneath the number on the front cover what they call the legacy number, and that would be the number that the number that the series would be on if they had not done all this. And I think that was, I don't know why else they would do it, an effort to placate your older, harder-core nerds in that regard. And I don't not appreciate it. I think that, because for a minute there, it was also like, oh, I did start, like, when I would put comics, when I would log my books into my list, I go, oh, cool, I can use the legacy numbers. But then they're not consistent. They don't put them on everyone. And then they started putting them on stuff like Silk, which is nothing against Silk. But the legacy number on whatever the last issue was, number 12, was something like 39. I'm like, look, that's not really a legacy. It's still double digits. It's not even at 100 yet. So I was looking at these comics, and of course I'm taking them out of our back issue bin, which is constantly being... My efforts to keep it as organized as possible are constantly being thrown in my face. So I pull out these, and so I have 2 issues of Silk that are numbered at number 2 different covers. I'm like that, but, and then the legacy number was something like 31, and then on the other one the legacy number was 37. That's not a legacy. You can't have 2. It's just, it sounds even stupider now that I'm saying it out loud. This is the sort of thing that bugs me, but boy, oh boy. See, this is the thing, and this is the criticism that I have for my fellow nerds, is that things change. Times change. Nothing is going to stay the same. I wish it would also. And I know exactly why they start series over and over again. But yeah, it does bug me. And the reason it bugs me and so many other vocal assholes is that we tend to take it personally. Your dollars, your opinion on how we publish these comics is not nearly as important to us as the suckers coming in off the street who see a number 1 on the thing and not necessarily thinking, oh, that'll be worth something, although that probably will cross your mind, I would imagine. But also, oh, I can start from here, I don't have to go back, which, oh no, you would have to go back and read more comics? Oh my god. Like, how that became... That became, yeah. And that's something that that's something I let go of as a teenager. Continuity and stuff like that. But yeah, that's like, to me, that's a really... I don't take that personally. I'm not going to be like, oh, I can't believe they're misnumbering these comics just to fuck my day up. But what I will say is that this catering to people who don't want to have... Okay, that's where I was going. Continuity, we can blame Marvel for this. Marvel was the first, really, before DC even, to have a shared universe. And to maintain that all of these things happening in all their comics being published were happening in the same universe. And then guys like me would get really nitpicky about, but how can this guy be here? How can Wolverine be on this X-Men team but also living in Madripoor over here? And it's a big mess. And you know, I used to get really upset about it. And then I just went, oh, right, I don't need to. For whatever reason, I think that might have been one of the first things. I think that was because I kind of walked away from comics for a while. So when I came back, I just like, well, I don't know any of this stuff anymore. So I'm going to have to go back and read a bunch of stuff that I missed. But that's the point. When people look at a number one, they think, oh, I don't have... That's the other thing, too, is that they're not starting at number one. If you picked up this issue of Alien today and never read an Alien comic before, I don't think you'd be lost. But I can almost guarantee you that they didn't... Philip Kennedy Johnson didn't spend the last year writing this book just so he could drop everything. I mean, you know, comic book arcs, the way they're written these days, are fairly self-contained, but why that's oh, I don't have to, I don't want to, and that was the complaint. I guess that was the complaint, was that, you know, when Avengers gets up into like the 600s, people aren't going to want to jump in. They're going to want to read it from the beginning. I don't know why. Because it doesn't really, you know what I mean? The numbers are just arbitrary, as they've proven over and over again. All right. I'm not even interested in that. Anyway, with a lot of titles like this these days, I don't know. The Avengers don't seem to be, the Avengers, you know, the Avengers were always, even when I was a kid, kind of second to the Justice League. Like, Marvel has definitely always had it over DC as far as I'm concerned. But nobody really gave a shit about the Avengers until these movies came out. And then there were, I mean, actually, it was when Bendis started writing the Avengers that they started getting more popular in comics. But, and I think they had, no, I don't think they had multiple titles until, I mean, you know, you'd get West Coast Avengers every now and again back in the 80s and 90s. But now this is the third Avengers title, monthly, that's coming out right now. Are they that popular still? That they can justify that? I also think it might be because Avengers and Avengers Forever are being written by Jason Aaron, and it's, both of them are locked into a very epic multiverse story. So it could also just be that they're like, well, why don't we knock out an Avengers book that, you know, your average schmuck can buy? And we'll put the big three: Thor, Iron Man, Cap. Black Panther has also been very much an Avenger, as Captain Marvel has. Spider-Man and Spider-Woman are, it's not the first time they've been on the Avengers. I don't know why they need to be on this team too, but there you have it. Alright, good. Now I can go to bed. As I put all of you to sleep. And then also today, not from Marvel Comics, we have Antioch #1 from Image. This is by Patrick Kinlan and Marco Ferrari, who are the creative team for the superhero book Frontiersman. Speaking of shared universes, Antioch also takes place in the same universe as the Frontiersman, but it's a completely different, not really connected. I have a feeling that they are going to become connected eventually. But I had just been, again, at work going through old books, and I'm like, oh, Frontiersman, when is that going to come back out? And then they're like, well, it's not yet, but we're going to give you this. I don't think Frontiersman is done, but I do think that these guys, that is something too that Image and other indie books have kind of done in the same vein as making numbers arbitrary again. Image Comics, especially Image Comics, but also Dark Horse and other small publishers have very slowly changed the industry over the years. Marvel and DC can make huge changes in one fell swoop, and they often have. But the indie publishers, it takes longer. But it's definitely worth the payoff. When Image started 30 years ago, it was all bad superhero stuff, knockoffs of Marvel and DC. But things like, you know, the monthly comic for there's another one. Monthly comics are really just how it's just momentum at this point. Comics come out monthly. And it was like a lot of the Image creators who were like, all right, fine, but why don't we take months off in between arcs? Why do we have to have it always be monthly? It's only this, it's, you know, in smaller creative teams, they don't have a bullpen to draw from, so they're like, we're going to take a break. And that started about 20 years ago in earnest, and it's really become kind of standard. You don't see it nearly as much with Marvel and DC because they still are invested in cranking out as much product as they can every month. And so keeping to a monthly schedule will help do that. Obviously, they fall behind schedule sometimes. But with books like Frontiersman, it's like they don't have to, and they made a big deal about how it wasn't going to be like every other superhero comic. And that's another way, is like, okay, well, now that we've introduced this character and his rogues gallery, let's move on to somebody else in the same universe. Sure, I'm on board. Anyway, that's picks of the week. Okay. So, since it was Labor Day weekend this past weekend, and it was honestly too hot to fart even. It's super hot, and then also just being around people is an awful, awful thing. So I didn't go out at all. So I got a ton of reading done. Still haven't finished that Starman book, but we're getting there. First up, I'll go with X-Force first. X-Force number 31, great fun, just like I imagined. It's Kraven versus Deadpool versus the mutants. And yeah, I gotta say, it's still kind of strange to me how resistant I was to this AXE event at the top, and even the first couple issues I was like, yeah, I mean, I guess, but now it's really, really getting good. Also, this is something that I have to say I kind of admire. It was revealed some time ago, I want to say over a year ago now, that Colossus is in fact working against, like, he's a spy. I don't remember what it is now. It's something where his older brother is kind of forcing him into this traitorous position, but they still haven't. So it's like, it's really pulling in, but I like it. They're really, and that is one thing about, and that's one thing about this entire era of X-Men and the X books. And this is definitely a very Jonathan Hickman thing, even though he's not, I don't think, even creatively involved with any of the X books anymore. They're still utilizing all the stuff that he laid out in House of X and Powers of X. And they go for the long con on things. It's like, yeah, we don't need to reveal to the rest of the, X-Men that Colossus is a traitor. We're going to make the audience sit and wait. I dig it. I'm into it. I'm having it. It's good. Also, Thunderbolts number 1. This was great fun also. I'm already a huge Thunderbolts guy. It isn't like I suspected last week. It's less to do with giving former villains a shot at becoming heroes and more to do with, because in New York now, in the Marvel Universe, superheroes are at their nadir. No, they're not popular. It's not the first time they've done that. Civil War was the most obvious one, but there's always been, Spider-Man's always been considered a menace by many New Yorkers. Yeah, it's good. I don't know. I feel like I had more to say, but I feel like I've said enough already. Also this week, so this is one I showed a few weeks ago. This Black Sad, They All Fall Down, Part 1. I read actually the entire stack of Black Sad comics, but my roommate's borrowing them now because I was so into them that I was like, you have to read these. The art in these books is just unbelievable. It's still like I was saying before, it's very mid-century Disney, which in itself is, where is that splash? It's in itself impressive, but it's also, I don't know. I don't know. Reading these books, I was just, again, blown away by how good they are. There's really not much else I can say. Maybe I was thinking of a different book that had this splash that I like. Shit. Yeah, I guess it must have been. But yeah, very noir. This one has a bit of a Chinatown feel to it, even though it takes place in Los Angeles. That was something that I noticed reading the whole series again, is that these guys are from Spain, and I'm sure they've been to America before. I don't know why I'm sure of it, but I feel like Europeans, people outside of America, are more well-traveled. But the stories all generally take place in New York City, and it's not. It's really just kind of American city. And I kind of like that, frankly. Like, that's how cities look. But because there was one, I think it was the first one where I was reading it, and there was a Lancashire Boulevard. I'm like, that's in L.A. Does this take place? And then I was thinking, like, L.A. is, generally speaking, more of the noir city. And sometimes there'll be palm trees. A couple of the stories take place, like one takes place in New Orleans and one takes place in Amarillo, Texas, but I don't know. I really enjoy seeing American culture through European or otherwise just non-American eyes. That's always interesting to me. especially when it's super good art on top of that. Speaking of Europeans doing American stuff, I also read these Lucky Luke books. So it's Man Who Shot Lucky Luke and Wanted Lucky Luke. Lucky Luke, I don't know much about, but Lucky Luke has been a beloved French comic book character, bande dessinée, as they call him over there. And France, along with Japan, is one of the few countries to really take comic books very seriously. And they put them out in these albums, so they're skinnier. They're like more like magazines, but they're definitely sturdier than magazines. These two are kind of new editions, and I don't remember the creator's name, and I can't read without my reading glasses now. But I've ordered a couple more just because I've always, and it's also American Western. And as Sergio Leone proved, the Europeans are way better at doing this stuff than we are. The stories themselves are pretty standard Western fare, but the art is really good. And generally speaking, I just really like Westerns too. Maybe this was the book I was looking. There was like a huge, really good splash page. I mean, they're very. They're very of their genre. Like this and Luke kind of hooks up with these three sisters who are crossing Apache territory, and of course they're all super hot and they all fall in love with them. But it's fun. I like that part. I mean, Westerns haven't aged well, I would say, and a lot of it is a lot of macho, a lot of machismo, and a lot of women taking subservient roles or being kind of the tough gal. It's not very progressive, but I still enjoy it. So as long as I'm happy. But yeah, these are really, really good. And these are by Matthew Bonhomme, who I believe is... I believe the creator did most of... And there's like a ton of Lucky Luke comics. And I don't know if he's still with us. I'll read more of them and I'll report back. I'm sure you're very eager.